Welcome again to my channel, everyone. Welcome into the channel of Travascence Unstoppable. This is Tuesday, March 14th of 2023. Well, this morning we didn't get to do the reading, so I'm going to have to do today's reading tonight in the place of our usual programming, which is Red Flag Review. So, for those of you who are looking out for the reading this morning, I sincerely apologize. I woke up a little bit late and I had to get to work, so I sincerely apologize. But we are going to continue the reading. This book has um been quite fascinating. This book, Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock, has been quite fascinating. We started reading it last weekend and we are way past halfway in it. We are going to be finished with it in the next few days. And guys, I must tell you, somebody sent me a book they want me to read. And so once we are finished reading this book, we are going to be reading this other book that's called The Alchemist that somebody mailed to me for me to read. Alrighty, so we are going to be reading that one afterwards. But also, guys, we are going to be taking up reading the Bible again. Remember, we were on this little trek where we were reading the Bible page by page, understanding it on our own level. And we are going to re embark on that journey because no journey is a journey unless the journey is completed. And we started that journey and we did not finish it. So we are going to re embark on that journey. But for tonight, we are going to be reading we're going to continue the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. Once again, I want to say thanks to everybody who has been coming in. Hey, Shawnee Bonnie, how you doing, my love? I want to say thanks to everybody who has been coming into the live and listening to me read, who have been watching my videos. I sincerely appreciate you all. For everybody else who come in, listen, don't say a word, don't comment, I still appreciate you all. Whatever your contribution is to my channel, I sincerely appreciate every single second of your time that you have spent over here. All right. So without further ado, let us move on to chapter 16 of the book Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. How in the heck do you drive this thing? Clara laughed loudly in the passenger seat. After they had walked back to the bank, Drake had asked if he could drive them to her house, expressing an interest in seeing how the old truck handled. She had happily given him the keys and then watched as he struggled to get it started. Once he finally managed to get them going, it hadn't gotten much better. At the first stop sign, the truck had sputtered hard enough to shake, nearly stalling out. I thought you were some sort of fancy race car driver, she said, teasing him. Shouldn't this be easy for you? No car, no car I've ever driven has been as bad as this. Accelerating, he tried to shift into a higher gear, but the stick fought him, grinding loudly until he jammed it into place. You do this every day? Drake asked with a laugh. It's not any nicer to me, you know. I tell you one thing. If I manage to open a garage in this town, I know who my first customer is going to be. Listening to him, Clara couldn't believe how quickly her life had changed. Whereas a week ago she had been plagued with worry and apprehension, now, suddenly and unexpectedly, things were looking better. And it was all because of Drake McCoy. When they turned onto the street where she lived, he was still talking about the truck. With a clunker like this, the only question is whether repairs are worth it. In the end, it might be cheaper to just buy something else, he exclaimed. The way I figure it, you could look around at but before Drake could finish, Clara let out a short scream, a reaction to what she had seen. Black smoke billowing from her house and into the sky. Oh my God, our mother burned down the house, people. That's just what my mind tells me. I have not read ahead. I swear, I have not read ahead. Sister Winsome Card, what's up? How are you doing? Good night, everybody. Good to see you all. Let us continue. I'm anxious to find out where the smoke is coming from. When Drake saw what had alarmed her, his reaction was swift. He made the truck go faster, working gear shift forcefully, ignoring its protest. Within seconds, he braked hard in front of the house, skidding a few feet before bringing them to a sudden, jarring stop. The next thing Clara knew, she was standing on the sidewalk, staring as if in a trance. My house! My house! It's on fire! Though she couldn't see any flames, smoke leaked skyward from the rear of the house. Clara could only imagine what was happening inside. The flames devouring everything in sight, burning up her belongings, taking away her memories until nothing was left. Instead of being frozen with shock and surprise, Drake acted. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the house. Come on! Come on! Together, they raced onto the porch. Drake whipped open the front door and plunged inside, with Clara right behind. The smoke made her eyes water, but it wasn't as thick as she'd expected. Wherever the fire was, it hadn't yet reached the front of the house. Tommy! My mother! Clara managed, frightened out of her wits. Drake pointed at the stairs. Go see if anyone is up there. I'll check down here. When Clara still hadn't moved, he shouted, Get going! Before disappearing into the smoke towards the rear of the house. Oh, Winsome says she at church. Okay, Sister Winsome. Clara didn't hesitate long before doing as he said. Something about this doesn't add up. When Drake had yanked open Clara's front door, he had expected to be assaulted by a wave of heat hot enough to burn exposed skin. He had assumed that the smoke would be chokingly thick and dense, but neither had been true. Even now, as he pushed through the living room and towards an open doorway at the back of the house, he only needed to keep his face pressed against his sleeve, his eyes squinted, and his breathing shallow. Don't relax, not for a minute. He, his hope was that he'd arrive before the fire grew out of control. If he could reach it in time, stop it before any real damage was done. Drake stepped into the kitchen and finally got some answers. Bright orange and yellow flames leaped from the cast iron skillet on the stove, where something crackled and burnt. Smoke billowed from the conflagration. Fortunately, the door just off the kitchen was open. It allowed smoke to pass through the screen of the inner door and up into the sky. That was what Clara had seen when they drove up. Drake stepped to the sink, filled a glass with water, and was just about to throw it on the fire when he suddenly stopped. He had no way of knowing what was burning. If it was grease, then tossing water on it would send it splattering in every direction and make the situation worse than it was already. Instead, he rummaged through Clara's cabinet, searching for something he could use. Finally, down among the pots and pans, he found a dented metal tray. Carefully, his arm extended far from his body. He dropped it onto the skillet with a bang, covering it completely and choking out the fire's air. Without any fuel, the blaze was spent in seconds. Welcome into the live, guys. Thank you all for coming. Once he had shut off the burner, the danger was no more. But even as he threw open windows to hasten the smoke's departure, Drake kept asking himself the same question over and over. What happened here? What really happened? With a sickening feeling in his stomach, he wondered if he didn't already know the answer. I wonder if Christine, well, where is Christine? I wonder if she's the one who left something burning. Clara raced up the stairs as fast as her feet could take her, rising through the smoke, causing it to swirl around her. On the landing, she turned left and pushed open the door to Tommy's room. Shouting his name, she frantically searched for some sign of her son. Fear and desperation gripped her tightly, but he wasn't there. She hurried back in the opposite direction, past the bathroom and her own bedroom, both of them empty. Before reaching her mother's door, Clara stepped inside and gasped at what she saw. Christy lay sprawled across her bed. She was on her side, completely still, her hair covering her face. At first glance, she looked peaceful. Clara's thoughts were anything but. Fearing that her mother had been overcome by the smoke, terrified that Christine could be dead, Clara rushed over and began roughly shaking the older woman's shoulder. Mom! Mom! She shouted, her voice panicked. Wake up! Wake up! At first, there was no response, so Clara shouted louder and louder and shook her harder and harder. But then Christine sputtered awake, her eyes narrow slits, unfocused and disoriented. What? What's going on? She mumbled. There's a fire! There's a fire! Clara yelled. We have to get out of here! Quick! Quick! Fire! Fire! What fire? What are you talking about? Before Clara could respond, Christine became aware of the haze of smoke filling her room. Her eyes went wide as she turned to her daughter, then away, raising a trembling hand to cover her mouth. Oh no, she moaned. Oh God, please, no. What is it? Clara asked, her stomach twisting into knots. I didn't mean to. I just came up here and Mom, Clara said softly, almost pleading. What happened? When Christine looked at her, her eyes were wet. I started cooking dinner, she explained. I put a pan on the stove. I was going to fry some onions to go with the roast, but it was there that her story ended. She didn't have to say more. Clara knew what had happened next. Her mother had forgotten about the stove, came upstairs, lay down, and fallen asleep while what was in the pan burnt to a crisp, filling the house with smoke. Oh, Clara, Christine cried, punctuating her words with a sob. An awkward silence stretched between them, broken by Drake's shouting downstairs. Fire's out, he shouted. I'm going to open up the windows. All right, Clara answered. Her voice sounded as out of sorts as she felt, as shaken by what had happened as her mother. The worst part was the way Christine looked at her. Her gaze was pleading, as if she was a child, helpless to deal with the circumstances in which she unexpectedly found herself. It was an accident, Clara offered, wiping away a tear. Her mother shook her head. I could have burnt the house down. But you didn't. You didn't, Mother. You didn't. What if you hadn't come home when you did? What if Tommy had been hurt? What if I got up in the middle of the night, put a pot on the stove, and killed all of us in our sleep? Clara didn't answer. What can I possibly say, Mother? What can I say? Suddenly, the sound of fire engine sirens rose in the distance. No doubt it was headed for their house. More than likely, a neighbor had called in because of the smoke. With every favorite beat of Clara's heart, the noise grew louder. She, she bought water. Christine started to cry. If the fire truck was coming, that meant there would be questions. If they answered truthfully, Clara's mother would be humiliated. For those who knew about Christine's troubles, it wouldn't be just a simple accident, but rather another indication that she was losing her marbles. I'll take care of it, Clara said, putting a comforting hand on her mother's shoulder. Don't worry. But by now, Christine wasn't listening. Her body shook as she sobbed into the mattress, overcome by shame, fear, and sadness. Clara stepped out of the room, shutting the door behind her. The sirens grew louder. Within seconds, the truck would be parked right outside. Even with the slowly dissipating smoke, she took a deep breath. She had a lie to tell. Hey, Empress! Empress, what's up? Every day I see Empress, Empress have a new name. She had a lie to tell. See, Empress right there, so. For the next hour, Clara weaved an explanation for what had happened that didn't place the blame on her mother, but on herself. She spoke with the firemen, wearing a sheepish smile, and told them she had put a skillet on the stove, but forgot about it when she and Drake went for a drive. When they came home, they found the house filled with smoke. Clara tried to look embarrassed, but worried that all it did was make her appear guilty. When Sheriff Oglesby arrived, the lights on his police car flashing, she repeated her story. The lawman took it all in, then started asking questions. When he inquired about whether Tommy or her mother had been home, Clara dug her hole a little deeper, admitting that she wasn't sure where Tommy was, but then claiming that her mother had gone to the library. Guilt ate at her, but she managed to convince herself that her lie hurt no one. In fact, it went a long way towards protecting what little was left of her mother's pride. She saw her neighbors watching from across the street and up on their porches, but no one came over to talk, for which Clara was grateful. She didn't want anyone to contradict her. What's going on, Empress? I'm here, my love. I'm here. I'm here. Doing what I should have done this morning. Yeah, we are here reading, my love. Reading is healthy for the mind, healthy for the brain. So that's what I'm doing here. Drake went along with her story, even trying to claim responsibility by saying that he had asked Clara to show him more of town. At first, she thought that Sheriff Oglesby was eyeing Drake suspiciously on account of his being a newcomer to Sunset, but the more they talked, the more it seemed as if the driver's charm put the lawman at ease. For her part, Christine remained hidden in her room. Oh Lord. Let's make sure this here is the only accident we have, the sheriff said with a wink as he got in his car and drove off. Once everyone had left, Clara and Drake exchanged looks of relief. Back inside, Clara went up to her mother's room to tell her that everything was fine, but the door was locked. When she knocked, there was no answer. Clara walked onto the porch. Night had fallen, wrapping the neighborhood in darkness. A few lights shone inside houses and from the street lamp on the far corner, but they couldn't hold a candle to the brilliance of the countless stars that filled the sky. Crickets chirped. Weary, she lowered herself into the porch swing and absently began to push herself back and forth, causing the hinges to creak. She and Drake had eaten a hasty dinner. He had gone to the grocery store and bought the fixings for sandwiches and a six-pack of beer. Together, in the still smoky kitchen, they said little. Christine had yet to leave her room, so Clara had taken her a plate, setting it on the floor outside the door. Tommy still hadn't come home. Once their meal was finished, and as Drake began to clear the table, Clara had wandered from the room and soon found herself outside. It wasn't because she was trying to get away from Drake, or even that she wanted to be alone, but only that she had drifted, drawn by the dark and the silence. The port swing was a familiar place for Clara to seek refuge. In the months and years after Joe's death, after Tommy had been put in bed, after she had managed to survive another day, she would often come outside and sit. She would cry. She would remember better times. She would even talk to Joe, hoping he could still hear her, just like when she visited his grave. But of course, she had never gotten a reply, though it was comforting all the same. You mind a little company? Clara looked up and found Drake. He held a beer bottle in his hand. When he nodded, he sat down on the railing opposite her. Nice night, he commented, taking a swig. It is, it is, she answered. After that, neither of them spoke for a while. Across the street, a couple walked by hand in hand, too far away for Clara to hear what they were saying. Whatever it was, it must have been funny, since the man busted out laughing. When I was little, Clara finally said, breaking their silence, giving voice to a memory that she couldn't keep inside. There was a little girl in my class named Evelyn Price. Every day she waited for me on my walk home, and no matter how fast I ran, no matter how hard I tried to get away, she always caught me. She would push me down, pull my hair, throw my books into a muddy puddle, that sort of thing. I'd come home bruised and crying my eyes out, complaining about Evelyn to my mother, begging her to do something. Did she? Drake asked, taking another drink. Clara shook her head. Not the way I wanted her to, she answered. Instead of talking with my teacher or with the Prices about what their daughter was doing, she told me that I had to stand up for myself, that she wouldn't always be there for me, and that if there wasn't another choice, I had to fight. So what happened? The next time Evelyn came after me, I stood my ground. She grabbed my hair and I sucked her in the nose. Drake chuckled. Sounds like you were a regular Joe Louis. It's the only time I've ever thrown a punch. It made me sick to my stomach, but it was worse for Evelyn. She took off running as fast as she could. It was the last time she ever bothered me. That's what you gotta do to a bully. That's what you gotta do to a bully. You gotta stand up to him. Oh, shucks. My book fell shut, guys. You gotta stand up to them, sock them in the nose if you have to. Whatever you gotta do, you gotta do it for you. And I bet you they will learn to leave you alone next time. Yep, that's what you gotta do. Oh my God. God say you gotta open a can of whoopers for them. You so wrong. Oh my gosh. Let me see where I was at. It's the only time I've ever thrown a punch. It made me sick to my stomach, but it was worse for Evelyn. She took off running as fast as she could. It was the last time she ever bothered me. So why is it that now, when my mother needs my help, when her problems are getting worse, I don't know what to do? She paused, hugging herself tightly, wrestling with the day's terrifying events. She almost burnt the house down. What do I do when she can't take care of herself anymore? What if there's another accident? What happens when her memory gets so bad that she doesn't even recognize me? For a while, Drake didn't answer. When he did, his tone was serious. Back on the farm, he began, my father thought I was one hell of a disappointment. Most days, he'd shout or shove me out of the way, complaining about some chore I hadn't done to his liking. The only thing he gave a damn about was when we brought in the harvest. From morning to night, far darker than this, my brothers and I were like slaves to him. Sure, we had a responsibility to help our family, but whenever we complained about being hungry, cold, or tired, my father had no compassion. All he had was his belt. The difference between our folks, he explained, finishing his beer and setting it on the railing, is that yours tried and mine didn't. So when it comes to now, to having to care for your mother, all you can do is listen to your heart and let it tell you what's right. Even if you fail, you'll always know that you did your best. That's the same as your mother did by you all those years ago. Drake's, Drake came to sit beside Clara on the swing. At first, she thought he wanted to comfort her, to pull her into his arms. All Clara think about, is the man to pull her in her arms and to kiss her. But all he did was put his hand over hers. She quickly accepted his touch, entwining their fingers. Sitting quietly beside him, Clara was nearly overcome with emotion. Tremors raced across her heart. Her eyes misted. Her skin grew warm. Because of Drake, she hadn't had to face this terrible, trying day alone. He had rushed into the smoke-filled house without a thought of his own safety, remaining calm in the face of crisis. When the fire truck and the sheriff had arrived, he had followed her lead without hesitation, helping to create a story in which the blame wouldn't fall on her mother. And now, by telling her about the troubles he had had with his father, he was trying to ease her burden. What she felt, what she felt just then was greater than any kiss or embrace. No matter how tender, it was special, magical, unbelievable even. Sitting there, her hand in his, neither of them feeling the need to say a word, Clara suddenly realized something she wouldn't have ever thought possible. I'm falling in love with Drake McCoy. Let me tell you no, a man Clara wants. That just popped out, guys. Oh my god, that just came out just like that. Clara Popular beat. That's something my grandmother would say. Your popular beat. Okay, Clara, we see you. We hear you. All right. All right. Let us move on because we want to see what's going to happen next in that smoky house. Chapter 17. Eddie walked quickly down the streets of Sunset. The early morning sun shone brightly. He had a touch of headache and his stomach felt queasy, undoubtedly due to all the alcohol he had drunk the day before, but he refused to let it keep him from the task at hand. So what me say? Me say a man Clara wants. Clara popular beat. While downing scotch, he had formulated a plan. He would learn the identity of the stranger who had interrupted him and Clara. He began by making phone calls. His newfound focus had cleared his head, although he suspected that some of his words must have been slurred. Asking around Sunset, he wanted to know of any recent arrivals. It didn't take long for his efforts to bear fruit. He discovered where the man was staying, the Sunset Hotel. From there, it was easy. Hetty had telephoned Edna Gilbert and learned every detail he could, beginning with the stranger's name, Drake McCoy. With that nugget of information, he had with that nugget of information, he had made more. Hold on. He had made more. He had made more phone calls up and down the highways, across the countryside, all the way to St. Louis. What Eddie learned was interesting. McCoy was a race car driver, a man who pitted his skills against others for money. For what he gathered, McCoy won more often than he lost. How the man had met Clara was still something of a mystery. Surely it was happenstance. McCoy had stumbled across the widow, become smitten, and thought he had some sort of claim on her. And that was why Eddie was headed to what passed for a hotel in these days. You know what's going on. He was going to dissuade the man. What wrong with Eddie? The truth was that Eddie wanted Clara Sinclair for his wife, which meant he was insanely jealous of McCoy. What could she possibly see in such a ruffian? How could a how could a race car driver who probably didn't have two nickels to rub together hold a candle to someone like himself, a man who was both important and incredibly rich? The answers eluded him. Eddie opened the front door of the hotel and stepped inside. The place was just as dingy as he remembered. The tabletops were covered in dust. The pictures on the walls had been bleached almost white by the sun, and a few window panes were cracked. When Eddie had been much younger, his father had gone out of his way to help Edna and her husband get the hotel off the ground and regularly brought his son with him to see how the Gilberts' business was doing. To Eddie's eyes, it had looked run down ever since, even from the first time he knew it. Morning, Eddie. Edna welcomed him from behind the front desk. The hotel's owner looked rough, her eyes red and her hair a rat's nest of tangles. Clearly, she had just awoken. Is he here? Eddie asked. Who do you mean? The older woman answered, stifling a yawn. The driver, McCoy. Who else would I be asking about? He snapped, the words coming out into a rush, startling even him with their intensity. The banker's anger cleared the fog in Edna's head. She stood a clear bit straighter and pushed some wayward hair back behind her ear. He and that fellow with him is rooming up on the second floor, she said. I ain't seen neither of them this morning, so I reckon they're still there. Then call them to come down, Eddie told her. The older woman nodded, sending her hair flying every which way, undoing the work she had done. She reached for the phone. Eddie folded his arms across his chest, satisfied. The last thing he wanted was to knock on McCoy's door. He wanted their meeting to be on his terms. It's time the two of us had a talk. Oh my God, Eddie is crazy. You don't look so good. Drake put it as politely as he could. Amos sat on his bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands. He had been asleep while Drake got dressed, snoring loudly, and had only just awoken. Amos wore a stained undershirt and a pair of boxer shorts, with plenty of wrinkles and sagging skin exposed. He slowly looked up to reveal a face that seemed as if it had been in an accident. His eyes were narrow, watery, and bloodshot. They peeked out over the top of dark bags. He hadn't shaved in days. A patchy beard was coming on, making him look 10 years older. His mouth hung open and his lips were red and chapped. As pale as he was, if Amos had been lying back on the bed, staring up at the ceiling, Drake might have wondered if he was dead. OMG. Thanks for noticing, the mechanic snarled without much humor. You want me to fetch a doctor? Amos shook his head as an act that looked to have hurt. I ain't got the time or the money. Besides, you gotta get the car ready to race tomorrow. Drake's eyes narrowed. You got him to agree to it? Weren't easy, the old man explained. By the time he accepted, I felt like I was begging. He winced, closing his eyes. That hillbilly was acting like he was doing us a favor. He can think whatever he wants, just so long as we got a race. Amos scratched his cheek. There's one hang-up, though. What is it? Drake asked. He wants to see the cash up front before we race. Probably thinks we are trying to bet with money we ain't got. No problem. Was he fine with the wager? The mechanic coughed and nodded at the same time. If I hadn't proposed it, I suspect he was gonna try to raise it himself. He thinks this boy could beat Zeus racing his damn chariot. He don't believe it's possible they could lose. Then he's in for a heap of disappointment. That's what I thought the first time we raced him. Amos spat out angrily. He wouldn't be in this pickle if you had kept your damn head on what was supposed to be doing instead of letting it daydream about some brood you met. Drake struggled to hold his tongue and his temper. He knew that if he spoke now, nothing good would come out of it. But that didn't stop Amos from stirring the hornet's nest further. I suppose you came back late last night, 'cause you were with her. That's right, Drake answered. I figured as much. I was hoping to have a word with you about your upcoming race, but seems like you having different priorities. With the way you are carrying on, maybe I ought to be worried about you showing up. Hmm. Now, just hold on a second. Hold on a second. You know damn well that Amos interrupted with a wet cough that wheezed its way out of his lungs. Damn it all, the mechanic groaned. You got no idea how happy I'm gonna be when we finally leave this two-bit town. Drake frowned. Hey, you know ever hear some man a plan and got a wipe out? All the man a plan for Kalalu and Kalalu a plan for run our belly. So here Amos is thinking that he and Drake are going to be leaving Sunset. And here Drake is already thinking about settling down in Sunset with Clara. Let's see what happens. Drake frowned. He had been hoping for a better time to talk to Amos about his decisions to give up racing and settle down in Sunset with Clara. He knew that his friend would disagree, that he would try to talk him out of it, but Drake was committed. The events of the day before, walking the streets with Clara, the scare of her mother's accident, and then sharing a seat with her on the porch, the two of them holding hands, had convinced Drake that she was the woman he had been waiting for his whole life. Then oh me can lucky so. Oh, what is Jesus? How want me do? We must say shit in a church. Right up on the pulpit. Oh my God. To leave now would be shutting the door on his one chance at love, and that was something he would not do. So while he feared breaking off his relationship and friendship with Amos, worried that the man he cared for like a father wouldn't understand, he knew he didn't have any other choice. About that, he began, we need to talk. Oh yeah? Amos asked. What about? But before Drake could say another word, the phone rang. The way Amos reacted, wincing in agony, the sound was worse than being punched. At first, Drake considered ignoring it, but then he wondered if it might be Clara, and so he answered. Instead, it was the hotel's owner. Mr. McCoy, she began, sorry to bother you, but there's a fellow down here who wants to have a word with you. Who is it? Drake asked. The woman paused. You should just come hear what he has to say, she said. I reckon that if he bothered to come up, it's bound to be important. With that, she hung up. For a moment, Drake stood with the silent receiver in his hand. Eventually, he put it back on its cradle, his thoughts churning. What was that all about? Amos asked. I've got to take care of something real quick, he answered, too curious to ignore the summons. Drake had the doorknob in his hand when he stopped, turning back to his friend and partner. We have still got things we need to talk about. Whenever you can find the time, Amos replied dismissively. With a groan, he laid back on bed, rolled away from Drake, and pulled the blanket over his head. You know where I'll be. Hey, Joe, what's up, my love? Good to see you as always. Hope you're having a fabulous night, my love. We are here doing what we should have done this morning. We're going to do it for just about an hour and a little bit. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, Drake saw who was calling on him. It was the banker, the same man who had upset Clara a couple of days before. He stood near the front door, facing away from the staircase, one foot nervously tapping the floor. He wore an expensive suit, the fabric too tight around his waist. And he's a fool. A gold watch chain hung from his pocket. Drake glanced at the woman who ran the hotel. She kept looking back and forth between the two men, her face sour, as if she had just bitten into a lemon. Abruptly, she turned and disappeared through a curtain hung behind the front desk. What in the hell's going on here? Drake cleared his throat. The man spun around, looking surprised. Ha ha, Mr. McCoy, he said cheerfully, although there was an obvious fakeness to his voice, a nervous tremor. I didn't hear you come down. I hope you don't mind my dropping by like this, but I thought we might just have to talk. We might just have to have a talk. He walked over and struck out his hand. I'm Eddie Fuller. I own the bank. Drake took the offered greeting, giving the man's hand one firm pump before letting go. Eddie's grip was cold and clammy. "What can I do for you?" he asked flatly. "Well," the banker began, fishing in his pocket for a silk handkerchief, which he used to wipe the rapidly accumulating sweat from his brow, "I was hoping we might discuss what we can do for each other." Eddie smiled strangely as he talked, flashing plenty of teeth. He acted as if they were old friends. But Drake saw right through the banker's fake chair. Over the years, he had met plenty of con artists, liars, and thieves, grizzled men in raggedy old suits who sold bottle tap water out of the back of their trucks, talking as fast and slick as a carnival barker, claiming that it would cure any ailment under the sun. Trashy young men who hopped from one rich man to the next, sucking their wallets drier than a creek bed in summer, getting by on their looks for as long as Father Time allowed, and so-called men of the cloth going around the countryside preaching in God's name, but always with their hands out and most donations finding a way into their pockets. Eddie might not be so blatantly rotten, but like those others, he was out for only himself, no matter who he had to trample on to get what he wanted. "So say your bit," Drake replied. Eddie looked toward the hotel desk. It was currently unoccupied, but Edna couldn't have gone far. "Let's step into the parlor," he suggested. Drake gave a curt nod and followed him into the hotel's front room. The parlor was small, but felt even tinier for being crammed with too many tables and chairs. However, with its fancy wallpaper and huge glass chandelier, it was surely the ritziest room the Sunset Hotel had to offer. Eddie took a seat near the window and beckoned for Drake to join him. "I'll stand," he answered. "Please," the banker replied, "we don't have to be enemies. We are both businessmen. Unless I'm mistaken and you race cars just for sport." Oh my, yes, this writer is good. I love the way this writer talks. I love it. Drake's eyes narrowed. Eddie again flashed his goofy smile. "Are you surprised that I tried to learn something about you?" "I shouldn't be. I just don't know why you'd go to the trouble." The rich man's cheeks flushed. "I would have thought that to be obvious." Drake's jaws tightened. "Clara?" Eddie nodded, still unable to meet the older man's gaze. "That's right. I can only assume from your arrival at the bank that you are interested in her as well." "Unfortunately, that's a problem," he said, finally turning to face Drake. "Is it now?" "I'm in love with her." Looking at the banker, it was obvious to Drake that, from the outside, Eddie Fuller wasn't much of a rival. His looks weren't the sort that attracted much attention, but the fact that he was probably the richest man in town meant that meant that dismissing Eddie out of hand would be a mistake. Drake had to tread carefully, as if driving on a wet track. "You are not her type," he replied. "Of course I am." The banker disagreed defiantly. "She deserves a man like me, someone successful enough to give her whatever she desires." "And what is it that you think Clara wants?" "Why, the same as every woman. A big home, a new car, jewels, fur coats, and parties at which to show it all off." Even though he had known Clara for only a short time, Drake was convinced that she longed for none of those things. It was good for him that she didn't, because he couldn't have afforded them anyway. But what he could give her was the thing she wanted most, even needed, and something Eddie had neglected to mention: love. "When I saw the two of you inside the bank," Drake said, "she didn't seem at all interested in you or any of what you were offering." Eddie's ridiculous grin faltered, revealing the ugliness underneath. "She will be. She will be," the banker insisted. "The more time we spend together, the more she will understand that there's no better husband for her than me." What I had planned that day would have gone a long way towards that if you hadn't interrupted and ruined everything. Eddie Fuller didn't strike Drake as the sort of man who handled rejection well. Rich men were used to getting what they wanted. Drake was convinced that if Clara was left alone with Eddie, no matter how much she rejected his advances, the banker would pressure her relentlessly into giving in. Clara would tell you otherwise, Drake said. Eddie shook his head. Though it pains me to say this, right now, Clara isn't smart enough to know what's in her own best interest. One eyebrow rose quizzically. I wonder if you are any better. What the hell are you talking about? Slowly, Eddie reached into his suit coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. I have something for you. He put it on the table and slid it across to Drake, who, with no small amount of trepidation, picked it up. When he unfolded it, his eyes grew wide and his breath caught in his throat. It was a check. It was made out in his name for $2,000. Guys, back then, $2,000 I want whole heap of money. We're talking about back in 1940s, 50s. That's a whole heap of money. So imagine the man giving Drake, Eddie giving Drake $2,000 so that Drake would leave Clara alone. What is not this, Lord? But that's how rich people always think that their money can buy everything. Money cannot buy happiness. You will see somebody could be with somebody who is rich, who can give them the world of riches. And they're just not in love with that person. And oftentimes people who are rich think that their riches speaks for them, but they have no heart. They are as cold as an icebox. They have no affection, no emotions. They are so tied to their money that they are not even good human beings. They're not even worth the air they breathe. And that seems like somebody like Eddie. Why? Why would he stammered? This is business, Eddie explained. That money is yours, no strings attached, so long as you do one thing. Drake's pulse hammered in his ears. Eddie leaned forward. All you have to do is pack your things, throw them in that fancy car of yours, and drive away. And then, once you have left Sunset, you don't ever come back. As a matter of fact, you never so much as think about Clara Sinclair again. What is not this, Lord? He looked into the banker's eyes, sure that this was some sort of a joke. But even though Eddie could meet the intensity of his gaze for long, the businessman was serious. He wondered if the man had done this before, buying someone off, making them give up something they cared about in exchange for money. Drake wasn't a rich man, never had been. There were times in his life when he had struggled with money, wondering where his next meal might come from, or how he was going to pay for a hotel room on a rainy night, or how he might afford enough gas to race. Somehow, through hard work and the strength of his convictions, he had always managed to come up with what he needed. But Clara wasn't for sale. Love wasn't something that could be bought at a roadside stand. It was a priceless jewel. For Drake to surrender Clara and walk away from something he had spent his whole life searching for would have been ridiculous. It was too great a cost, one he would never pay. You are insane, Drake spat as he began ripping the check into little pieces. For a split second, Eddie looked stunned, wide-eyed at the turn of events. But then his eyes hardened. He reached inside his suit and pulled out his checkbook. All right then, you want more? Is it? He asked. Name your price. You don't have enough to make me leave, Clara. Come on now. What if I double it? Eddie prouded, raising his pen, poising it above another check. Go to hell, Drake snarled. You would walk away from $4,000? You are damn right I would, he replied, and made to do exactly that. But then Eddie said something that made Drake stop in his tracks. Do you know what will happen to Clara if you refuse this money? Drake turned back. You see, my bank owns the note on Clara's house, Eddie exclaimed. Oh Lord, Eddie's something else. With some creative accounting, by changing a number here and there, I can make it appear that Clara's behind on her payments. Her loan would be in arrears. He paused, his tongue darting out to lick his dry lips. If you couldn't come up with the money, the bank would own the house and she'd be out on the streets. Drake fumed, his thoughts churning. It was obvious that this was the leverage Eddie was using against Clara. It explained why she had been so reluctant to talk about what had happened at the bank. If she didn't give in to Eddie, he would take her house and ruin her life, along with those of her mother and son. You'd never get away with it. Oh, I most certainly would. If I were you, it's a risk I wouldn't be willing to take, the banker said, flashing a smug, irritating smile. You son of a bitch, Drake growled. Eddie held up his hands as if he was afraid that Drake was about to tear him limb by limb. I don't want to do it that way, he said. I want her love unconditionally, but to have her, I will use force if I have to. Unfortunately, Drake believed every word the bastard said. So what was he going to do about it? But then, surprisingly, Eddie gave him a sliver of hope. I know this is a lot to think about, the banker said, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. How about you take a day or two to think it over, to fantasize about all the money, to, to, fantas, to fantasize about what all this money might buy you. With some time, I'm sure you'd see it my way. If you actually have feelings for Clara, you'll agree that the best thing you can do is to get away as far, far away as possible. Because if you don't, Drake understood all too clearly. Without a word, he turned and left. The clock was ticking. Wow, that's two chapters we have read there, 16 and 17. Let me see what chapter 18 looks like. Chapter 18 is long, but we're going to read chapter 18. Since we hadn't read this morning, we are going to read chapter 18 as well. Guys, I hope you all are enjoying the reading as much as I'm enjoying reading it for us, because I've fallen in love with this book and I want to hear what else happens, because this book gets more and more interesting as we go along. Limb by limb, we are going to cut him up. Exactly. Drake will tear Eddie to pieces, limb by limb. We're moving on, guys, to chapter 18. Open up, Mom, Clara said as she leaned against the closed bedroom door, her ear pressed against the wood, straining for a sound. Please, Mom, open up. She held another plate of food in her hands, the third she had brought for Christine to eat, a couple of eggs, some sausages, and 2 pieces of toast. Clara hoped this one would have a different fate than the others. Each had remained untouched, reluctantly taken away after they had turned cold as stone. After Drake had left the night before, Clara had gone to bed, but once again hadn't been able to sleep. She had stared at the ceiling, listening for any sound from her mother. The creak of the floorboard, the rustling of bed sheets, even a cough or a snore. But all she heard was the beating of her own heart. The beating of her own heart. Eventually, it had calmed her to sleep. But once morning had come, still without a sound, a touched plate or an open door, Clara had started to grow concerned. How you go to sleep the whole night and you not see your mother, Clara? Mom, can you hear me? She knocked harder and harder, more insistently, her fist pounding against the wood, but there was still no answer. Suddenly, panic flared in Clara's heart. What if something had happened to her mother? What if she was hurt, in need of help? Mom, open up! Open the door! even as Clara yelled, her imagination began to run wild, creating one horrible scenario after another, terrifying her. She grabbed the doorknob, turned it while pulling at it at the same time, rattling the door in its frame in a desperate attempt to make it open. Shame filled her for not doing it sooner, for letting her mother wallow in her pain, for not trying to help. She was only vaguely aware of the plate shattering on the floor, food spilling at her feet. She pounded and yanked and shouted all at the same time. But then, just as she was about to ram the door with her shoulder, hoping she might be able to force it open, Clara heard something. "Leave me alone," Christine said from the other side of the door. Clara gasped with mixture of relief and sadness. Tears filled her eyes. "Mom! Oh, Mom!" she answered, her face again pressed against the door. "Please, Mom, please open the door." Once again, there was silence. Slowly, Clara straightened, wiping away her tears as she tried to compose herself. Her mother had given her what she wanted, the acknowledgement that she was alive, but she would grant nothing more. Reluctantly and with a heavy heart, Clara walked away. Clara absently pushed herself on the porch swing. Lazy clouds drifted by on the afternoon breeze. On the opposite side of the street, George Atkinson, Sunset's mailman, went about his appointed rounds. Somewhere nearby, a car honked its horn, two short beeps followed by one long note, its own Morse code. How different everything looked last night. Hours earlier, she had sat in the swing beside Drake, their fingers entwined, the warmth of his skin enough to ward off the evening's chill. After the day's excitement, his presence had been a comfort. She wanted him beside her and was thankful that that was right where he wished to be. So much had changed in such a short time. She could only imagine how different it would become now that Drake had expressed a desire to remain in Sunset, to stay by her side. Drake's declaration had surprised her. That was that he was willing to give up all that he had to be with her. When she listened to him talk about their relationship, opening a garage, a future in Sunset, it gave her hope. Her life since Joe's death had been so gloomy, it was hard to believe that sunnier days were on the horizon. She was scared that she would be wrong, that she was misunderstanding something about the situation, but she refused to surrender to her fears that she couldn't find happiness, that she didn't deserve love. She most certainly did. Still, there was a problem. Foremost on Clara's mind was Tommy. Her son still hadn't come home since his grandmother had nearly lit the house on fire. He was surely with Naomi, unaware of the calamity that had struck his family. But what alarmed Clara most was her reaction to his absence. She had started to get used to it. She knew that it was wrong of her, that Tommy was in a precarious spot in his life where one mistake could ruin him. So, right then and there, Clara decided that regardless of her mother's deteriorating health, her troubles with Eddie, and even her relationship with Drake, her son had to come first. Nothing else was more important. It was then that Clara heard a sound that stunned her: piano music. Guys, remember when Tommy was younger, he would sing while his grandmother would play the piano? Let's see if he's home playing the piano. You know, sometimes when you have teenage children, they go through that rough period. And sometimes if you just make sure that they are safe and, you know, provide the right environment for them, and you'll be surprised, they will come around. They will come around. If you continue to barrage them, beat them down, and cuss them, and them workless, and them now come to nothing, then they will not come to anything. But if you just give them a little nudge, a little guidance, you'd be surprised to see that as they mature, they will find their place in society. Let us continue. Without hesitation, Clara was out of the porch swing and hurrying for the front door. Inside, she froze, dumbfounded by what she saw. Her mother was playing the piano. Christine sat on the small bench, her hands moving quickly, dancing from one note to the other. Bright sunlight streamed through the windows to fall across the wooden floor, wash over the black instrument, its heavy lid closed, and finally reached the edges of the ivory keys. Music echoed around the room. The melody was familiar, a song that Clara had listened to often when she'd been a little girl. Song of the Lark by Taskoki. What? By Sakovsky? I don't know that name. Sakovsky? I can't pronounce that. That's Russian, something like that. But something, Tisakovi, Tishakovsky, Tchaikovsky. Oh, Tchaikovsky. Now that I say Tchaikovsky, I remember that there is a musician named Tchaikovsky. Okay, so that is the word, guys. All right. Song of the Lark by Tchaikovsky. Christine Hands worked up and down the keys, her face a mask of concentration, while her foot gently pumped the pedals. Tears filled Clara's eyes. Happiness and relief flooded her heart. It had been many long years since her mother had last played. For as long as Clara could remember, music had been Christine's greatest passion. She plunked Christine's tunes, contorted her fingers through the complexities of Mozart, somberly played during funerals, reveled at weddings, and had even composed a few songs of her own. But then her memory had begun to fade. One day, years ago, Clara had suddenly realized that her mother hadn't played for a long time. It was easy to understand why. For Christine, the frustration of tripping over a note she had struck thousands of times before had become unbearable. Rather than embarrass herself, it was easier to shut the lid over the keys. That was the end of it. Oh my time! Oh my time, so that's why you can't find me. Me busy in a Clara and Drake business. That's why you can't find me. Oh my time! Oh my time! I'm here there work here there your bed. Cause no late hours for you now. Until today, once she finished Tchaikovsky, Christine moved on to a church processional, then a show tune that Clara recognized but couldn't name, and finally a lively Duke Ellington number. Sweat beaded on her brow, but Christine never slowed. Occasionally she would stumble over a note, making the slightest of errors, but Clara didn't know if it was because of a deficiency in her memory or simply the rust from not having played for so long. Listening to the music, Clara was reminded of happier times, back when Tommy used to stand next to his grandmother and sing with the enthusiasm of a child, not the least bit self conscious of his voice. Reminiscing made her happy and sad at the same time. Oh, yeah, their work. Okay. Clara wondered if her mother knew she was there, listening, but when Christine finished playing with a flourish, she looked up and right into her daughter's eyes. A small, satisfied smile filled her face. That was incredible, Clara said. Her mother didn't answer, but a bit of color rose in her cheeks. For a moment, neither of them spoke. After so much music, the silence felt heavy, ominous. I'm sorry I didn't answer the door, Christine finally said. I, I, I'm just so ashamed of what happened. I could have killed us all. But you didn't, Clara insisted. It was the same conversation they had yesterday, which made her wonder if her mother had forgotten. What if you hadn't come home when you did? What then? I didn't call the fire department, so that means one of our neighbors did. They would have put it out instead of Drake. Clara's reassurance seemed to have no effect on her mother. Christine shook her head as her eyes grew wet. I can't stop thinking about it, she exclaimed. Every time I try to recall what I was doing, so much of it stays hidden away, like it's wrapped in fog. I remember wanting to start dinner. I got out the skillet, put in some lard, turned on the stove, but then a curtain comes down, and the next thing I know, you are shaking me awake and telling me that the house is on fire. Everyone has moments like that, Mom, Clara argued. There are lots of times when I can't remember doing something. Why? Just last week, Stop it, her mother interrupted. But it's not as bad as Clara Elizabeth. You just hush up right now, Christine snapped, using her daughter's middle name to silence her. Don't you lie to make me feel better. We both know I'm getting worse. There's no use in acting any different. Slowly, reluctantly, Clara nodded. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what this is like for me? Christine asked, her lip trembling. To know that the day might come when I don't even recognize you, that I might do something that gets Tommy hurt. It's unbearable. Though she wanted to say something, anything that might alleviate her mother's suffering and worries, Clara couldn't. The truth was, she had the same concerns and had yet to come up with an answer. I know you won't want to hear this, her mother continued, tears flowing down her cheeks. But some nights, just before I fall asleep, I think it would be better for you and Tommy if I didn't wake up. Oh Lord, she's thinking about taking her own life? Oh Lord. Clara rushed to her mother's side. Sitting beside her on the piano bench, she pulled Christine closer, wrapping her arms around the older woman's shoulders as the two of them sobbed. It devastated Clara to hear her mother say such a thing, to admit that she would rather die than live with the fear of her deteriorating memory. She was angry. She was angry at both the unfairness of what was happening and her inability to do anything about it. Whenever Clara needed her mother, especially in the years after Joe's death, Christine had always been there, providing support, care for Tommy, anything that might be needed. But now, but now that their situation was reversed, the mother, the mother needing her child, Clara was helpless. Once their tears had subsided, Clara tried to come up with a solution. Maybe we could hire a nurse, someone who can be with you all day. Christine shook her head. You know we can't afford that. How about one of your friends? Ruth Mitchell is retired now. She might be willing to come over while I'm at work. Her mother didn't respond. Clara suspected that the idea was too embarrassing to consider. Then I'll stay home with you. And what will we do for money? We can barely make ends meet now, especially since I'm not at the library anymore. We'll find a way, Clara declared, though she had no idea how. Well, Drake is going to set up garage. Drake is going to be the man of the house. So Drake, now you find a provider, Clara. Hey, why not? Make good use of it. Her mother was right. They were escape They were scraping by as it was. The house was slowly falling apart, one broken thing after another, to say nothing of the problems with the pickup truck. On top of everything, there was Eddie's threat to take away the house. If that happened, they would lose everything. But then Clara thought about what Drake had said the night before. You see, oh, woman quick for think, figure up them things because man ready to give them something. Man give them one little something and them ready to give up everything them have. But that's how the heart works, guys. When you are in love, you will do just about anything. Do you remember Evelyn Price? She asked. Her mother smiled. That's a name I haven't heard for a very long time. Her family moved away 10 years ago or so, didn't they? Clara nodded. She used to bully me on the way home from school when we were little. I asked you to make her stop, but you wouldn't do it. I made you stick up for yourself, Christine said. It was one of the hardest lessons I ever had to learn as a mother, to let you fight your own battles. All I wanted was to march over to the Prices and give her parents a piece of my mind. But I couldn't. You needed to learn how to stand up for yourself. Why are you telling me this? Clara took a deep breath. Because you encouraged me. You gave me strength. Because of what you said, even if Evelyn had continued to bully me, I wouldn't have quit. So that's just what we are going to do now. We are going to fight this. As she spoke, Clara's voice, as well as her conviction, grew stronger. You are not going to lock yourself in your room anymore, too frightened to do something because of what might happen. Each one of us, together as a family, Tommy included, we are going to get through this. Her mother nodded, but she didn't seem very convinced, so Clara tried a different approach. What made you decide to play the piano again? I don't know. Not exactly, Christine answered. Whenever I used to be out of sorts, sad or angry, I would sit at the piano and play until those bad feelings went away. After what happened yesterday, after the fire, I was drawn to it. Offering a weak smile, she added, maybe I forgot I couldn't play. But you still can. Today at least. But what about tomorrow or the day after that? There are no guarantees, Mom, Clara answered, but you are never going to know what you can or can't do unless you try. It doesn't matter if you forgot what you wanted for breakfast, or if you already went to get the mail, or even how to play the piano. You just find something else to eat, check the mailbox again, or sit back down and start plunking the keys. Mistakes and failures are only temporary, nodding towards the piano. She added, they clearly don't mean forever. I, I don't want to be a burden to you, Christine said. You couldn't ever be, Clara told her, smiling through tears. But there is something you could do that would make me plenty angry. What's that? You could give up, Clara replied. Now is the time to fight, not surrender. Isn't that what you taught me? Christine smiled more genuinely than before, and you actually listened. If that isn't a miracle, I don't know what is. This time, instead of music or sobs, laughter filled the room. Clara put the last of the dishes from lunch into the sink. Her mother had gone upstairs to lie down, promising that she wouldn't so much as shut the door, let alone lock it. After their conversation at the piano, things between them felt easier. Trying to keep things positive, Clara told Christine that this was a new beginning for all of them, a chance to start afresh. But then, just as she started to hum one of her melodies her mother had played, there was a knock at the front door. She slipped off her apron, dried her hands, and went to answer. She opened the door to find Drake standing there, running a hand through his dark hair. But unlike the night after they first met, this time he seemed distracted, and the smile he gave her looked forced. Well, I bet she's there now he's there to tell her about the encounter with that Eddie. Let me listen to this, guys. Don't you all want to hear? I certainly want to hear him tell her what Eddie said and how he told Eddie to go where to go chuck his check. He's trying to get him to leave town so that Eddie can have Clara. But Eddie got the audacity, don't you think, guys? The nerve of Eddie. She opened the door to find Drake standing there, running a hand through his dark hair. But unlike the night after they first met, this time he seemed distracted, and the smile he gave her looked forced. What's the matter? Clara asked, frowning. But instead of answering her question, Drake asked one of his own. How are things with your mother? Clara told him what had happened, from trying in vain to get Christine to open the door, to her shock at hearing the piano, and then about their conversation. Drake occasionally nodded during her story, a bit absently, she thought. He wasn't even looking at her when he said, "That's great." Holy mackerel. Let us continue. Hold on. I don't know why these pages are so hard to turn. "Why don't you come in?" Clara told him, stepping aside. "I can fix you something to eat." Drake shook his head. "If you don't mind, I'd like to stay out here. I'm so worked up right now that I can't hardly stay still." Once again, she asked, "What's wrong?" He took a deep breath. "You might want to sit down." Clara sat on the porch swing. Unlike the night before, Drake didn't join her. Instead, he paced back and forth in front of the railing. She began to feel uneasy. "Drake," Clara said. He stopped and looked at her. When I, ca- when I came to get you at the bank, what was happening between you and your boss?" "Eddie? Eddie had asked me to stay after work," Clara answered, uncomfortable with the question, but unwilling to lie. "He was upset about something I haven't done." "Something that had to wait until after the bank was closed?" Clara froze. This question was more direct, one she couldn't deflect so easily. In the end, she chose not to say anything. Drake came over and leaned against the porch railing opposite her. "Clara," he said softly, insistently, "tell me." She looked up at him, the sun shining off the side of her face, uncertain about what she should do. Hesitantly, she said, Eddie's infatuated with me. He wanted me to stay after work so that we could talk. He said that if I didn't, I could lose my job. That's all." "Is that all?" Drake pressed. "Your position at the bank?" Clara knew that this was her moment of truth. All she had to do was tell Drake that Eddie threatened to take away her home in order to force her to marry him. But she couldn't do it. It was too embarrassing, a blow to her pride, not all different from what her mother suffered because of her memory loss. Besides, what good would come of her telling Drake? How could he possibly help? Somehow, some way, she would find a solution on her own. "That's all." She lied. Drake was silent for a long while, watching her closely. Finally, he nodded his head, got up from the railing, and headed for the stairs. He was halfway down the walk before Clara, confused by what was happening, shouted to him. "Where are you going?" she asked. He stopped. His shoulders slumped, then turned back. His expression was one of disappointment. "You are lying to me." Clara's heart raced. Shame forced her to look away. Somehow, he knew. "Drake, I, I, she stammered. "I already know everything," Drake told her. "I know exactly what that bastard is holding over you." "Oh, wow. We finished chapter 18 just like that." "Oh, okay. All right. Who else is here? How many of you all are here, guys? Do y'all want me to continue with chapter 19? Who wants me to continue to chapter 19? If you want me to continue with chapter 19, say yay. Otherwise say no. Overton card, Joseph, and everybody else in the chat. Sister Winsome might be here as well. Shawnee Bonnie might be here as well. Empress might be here as well. And I don't know who else is here, but it look like other people is here. Who want me to continue, guys? Talk to me. All right, me not hear no word. Should I stop or should I continue? What that noise about? Stop or continue? We are on to chapter 18. We will want to finish read the book here, so guys, because I have to go back to the Bible maybe tomorrow morning. Or maybe the weekend. The weekend may I work. I don't know. But I have to go back to the Bible. And then I have this, The Alchemist, to read. The Alchemist seems like a small book. It is only, let me see. Let me see how many pages in it. How much pages a book you have? I want a little bit of pages. Cause the book thin a little bit like what? 170 something. Me a listen lady continue. You gotta pay me if you read Piano Empress. You gotta pay me. All right, let's move on, guys, to chapter 19. Walking away from Clara was one of the hardest things Drake had ever done, but she had left him little choice. He knew everything about her and Eddie, that the banker was blackmailing her into becoming his wife. Drake had even been offered thousands of dollars to step aside and let it happen. But when he had given the woman he was falling in love with a chance to be honest with him, Clara had lied to his face. This wasn't a time for secrets. All of their cards needed to be laid out on the table. How? How do you know? Clara asked, astonished. Eddie came to see me at the hotel this morning. He was upset that I'd interrupted the two of you and wanted to make sure it wouldn't happen again. He offered me money to leave town. He tried to bribe you? Drake nodded. He wasn't playing around. It was an awful lot of money. And and you, you she didn't finish her question, but Drake could see the hope in her eyes wished as if she had wishing for the right answer. I tore up the check, he said, but that didn't bother Eddie for long. He pulled out his checkbook and offered to double it. Drake paused, letting the words linger. I told him there was no amount he could pay me to make me leave you. Relief washed over Clara's face, but Drake quickly wiped it away. But that's not all, he explained. Eddie said that if I didn't do as he asked, if I refused to take the money, he'd take your home. He looked up at the porch. He said that he'd doctor the books to make it look like you were behind on your payments. If you didn't agree to marry him, he'd throw you out on the streets. Drake watched Clara crumble. Tears flowed down her cheeks. She hugged herself tightly, as if she was trying to keep from shaking. But her gaze never wavered, holding his through through her trembling lips. Why didn't you tell me? Drake demanded. Why did you lie? His questions were enough to make her look away. Because I was embarrassed, she answered. Because I'm ashamed to be in this position. Because I've spent the last 9 years struggling, doing most everything on my own, and I'm sick of asking for help. Her eyes once again found his. They were narrow, smoldering. I still have some pride left. It might not be much, beaten down and tired as it is, but it's enough so that I don't want to bear every problem I have. Not to you, not to anyone. Drake's respect for Clara grew. Inside her, no matter how deep it was buried, remained a spark of strength that neither Eddie nor any of her other troubles could extinguish. He had noticed it the day they met. It was one of the many things that had attracted him to her. How much do you still owe on the house? He asked. It doesn't matter. Yes, it does, Drake insisted. Lots, more than I could ever hope to raise if Eddie actually went through with his plan. I'd lose everything, and he knows it. Drake had a thought. There was the money he had been squirreling away, both the little amount in the bank in Illinois and what was buried in the bottom of his duffel bag back at the hotel. Lord Jesus, I hope he must not take the little money go and go buy. Me feel say he must take the money and go buy morphine, you know. Me feel say Eddie take the money. Cause remember in the hotel room the other night, he said how Eddie looked like a mess, or Amos looked a mess, how his eyes were baggy and he looked really terrible. And I think he took the money and went and bought morphine. So there's going to be hell to pay when 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 Drake finds out that the money he think is there is not there because Amos stole it. Drake had thought that there was the money he had been squirreling away, both the little amount in the bank in Illinois and what was buried in the bottom of his duffel bag back at the hotel. It likely wouldn't be enough to pay off the loan, but it wasn't chicken feed either. It might buy them time, a chance to find another bank without such an unscrupulous owner or to expose Eddie's lies. Slowly, a plan began to take form in his mind. The thought struck Drake that maybe all those years of diligently sucking away cash had been so that right here, right now, he could save Clara so that they could start a life together. Maybe there's another way. Time to call the FBI. Back then, not even the FBI was formed yet. Extortion, yes. This Eddie is really something else. Clara's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Even if Eddie called in your loan, he said, nothing would happen right away. You'd have some time. Enough to pack my things and get out, Clara added. He shook his head. That's not what I mean. You might be able to get another bank to cover you. Why would they do that? Why not? If Eddie has gone through with his threat, it's because I turned down his proposal, she explained. If I don't agree to marry him, he'd fire me for sure. That means I won't have any income. Without that, no one, certainly no other bank, would be willing to take a risk on me. Unless you could give them some money up front, a down payment, which I don't have, Clara said, frustrated. You might not, he answered, but I do. What are you talking about? Once again, Drake began to pace, growing more energized with every step. Ever since I started racing, I've put away some of my winnings, he began. It was never a lot of money at once. $100 here, $20 there, whatever I could spare. But if you do that for a decade or more, it adds up. I've been hauling it around with me, waiting for the rainy day when I might need it. Looks to me like that day is here. Oh my Jesus. You say take the money and pay off the house? Why not? He asked. Your garage, she said, coming down the stairs to stand beside him. You were planning to open it with your savings, weren't you? But that was before I knew. If you give me that money, Clara interrupted, will you have enough left over to get started? Drake took a deep breath. I won't, he admitted, but that's why I can't let you do it. It isn't your choice to make. Besides, what if we said that I'm not giving it to you, but that it's a loan? We'd be old and wrinkled before I could pay you back. Drake smiled. I wouldn't mind as long as we're still together. Oh, that's so sweet. That is so sweet. His words stunned Clara. He had said it lightly, yet when she searched his face, there was no humor in his eyes. It was no joke. What Drake was suggesting was life changing for both of them. He was offering commitment, stability, and hope, things that she hadn't had in a long time, so long that it felt unfamiliar. He was proposing a plan to keep Eddie from taking her home, but also something grander, the idea that they would build a life together. And while she was surprised, Clara found herself wanting to take him up on his offer, to believe it was possible. In a way, Drake was asking her to take a leap of faith. Who never take a leap of faith in a relationship, guys? Yeah, guys. Mr. Brother, one time I take one leap of faith, you see, I'm go right over lovers man leap, right over in the cave. Mister, one time I take a leap of faith. Take a leap of faith for something when me think when me one alone in a car love. Mister Brother, I went right over the edge, brother. Drowned and struggled and all. What you want, card no about Trev? That book you curl up your toes. Leave me alone. Allow me. I'm more than me toes they are the curl up sister. Oh my god. And that's why I can't stop reading book, cause me get so when me start reading book here, guys, I tune in and know. I don't know how exciting it is for me. But let us continue. His words stunned Clara. He had said it lightly, yet when she searched his face, there was no humor in his eyes. It was no joke. What Drake was suggesting was life-changing for both of them. He was offering commitment, stability, and hope, things that she hadn't had in so long they felt unfamiliar. He was proposing a plan to keep Eddie from taking her home, but also something grander, the idea that they could build a life together. And while she was surprised, Clara found herself wanting to take him up on his offer, to believe it was possible. In a way, Drake was asking her to take a leap of faith. But Clara was having trouble taking that first step. Let me help you, Drake said again. I, I, I can't, she said. You are offering too much. No, no, I'm not, he insisted. Ever since we met, you have talked about all the troubles weighing you down. But here I am, trying to make things better, and you won't let me. Clara didn't know how to answer. Drake stepped closer, reached out, and took her hand. In a way, he began, I understand why you don't want my help. You do? He nodded. For years you have had to do it on your own. But it doesn't have to be that way anymore. You are not alone. I'm here now. Oh, oh my gosh! What a nice thing. She just found her Prince Charming, guys. I'm Clara in this story. But I ain't found my Prince Charming. I ain't looking for him either. And I guess when he come, if he ever comes, I'm gonna be pushing him away. Yeah. I'm a widow. I have a son. Drake shook his head. None of that changes a thing. I want to be there for all of you. Clara's heart knocked hard in her chest. I'm not your husband. I'm not Joe. Drake continued as he searched her eyes, looking into their depths. I can't ever replace what you had with him. The truth is, I don't want to. All I want is a chance to create something special with you, our own love. But that won't happen for you are living while you are living in the past. Yesterdays are fine and dandy, but if you aren't careful, you'll spend all your time looking backwards and miss tomorrow. Clara squeezed his hand tightly, clinging to him, her knees unsteady. I've spent my whole life going from one place to the next, Drake said. It's time for me to stop running, to put down roots. This is my chance to build something, but I can't do it on my own. You need to meet me halfway. I want to. I really do. But Clara still couldn't bring herself to say the words. You are right, she answered, wiping away a tear. Things have been a mess for so long that I don't remember it being any different. Even now, with you a part of my life, I have to deal with Eddie. My mother almost burned the house down. And then there's Tommy. I, I don't know where he is. Drake frowned. He still hasn't come back? Clara shook her head. Drake looked past her and towards the street as if he was searching for her son. All right then, he said. Let's take care of one problem at a time. First, we find Tommy, and then we can talk about what to do with Eddie. Clara glanced back at the house. I can't leave my mother, she exclaimed. Not now, not so soon after what happened. Then I'll go look for him. What will you do when you find him? She recalled what Drake had said about his first encounter with Tommy, her son storming off at the mention of Naomi. Nothing. Anything I say will likely go in one ear and out the other. Right now, the most important thing is to find out if he's all right. The first place I'd look is in the Marshland Tavern. Naomi's father owns it. Then that's where I'll start. For a short while, neither of them spoke. Then, gently yet insistently, Drake pulled her to him. Clara felt as if she floated into his arms. Her feet never touched the ground. She raised her chin and closed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. When he kissed her, it was tender, as soft as a flower brushing against her cheek, but with enough emotion to make her pulse race. It was only quickly, no longer than a few fevered beats of her heart, though Clara knew she would feel its effects long after Drake had driven away. Lord Jesus, God, my toe them a curl, my finger them a curl, my tongue a curl, everything curling. Mika, what's up? Thank you so much, sweetheart. Welcome into the live. Yeah, we are doing the reading of Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. We are on the last chapter for tonight. We are reading chapter 19, I believe it is. Oh wow, this book is so delightful. I love it. Just before he reached the Plymouth, he stopped and turned back. I'll find Tommy, he promised her. With all that she said, Clara hoped he was right. Drake started his search for Tommy at the tavern Clara had told him about. From the outside, it looked like hundreds of others he had come across over the years. It was a dump. If there was one thing Drake had learned, it was that when it came to alcohol, most people didn't give a damn where they got it, only that they did. At 3 in the afternoon, only the desperate and lonely were staring at the bottom of a glass. Pushing open the front door, Drake found two men in the bar. One had his head down on the dullwood and looked to be asleep, and the other was the bartender, spit shining a glass with his dirty apron. Tommy was nowhere to be seen. So Drake looked everywhere else he could think of. He drove up one street and down another, his head on a swivel, peering into every window, checking alleyways, and searching every yard. He followed the river to either end of Sunset. He stopped on the train tracks and stared in every direction. He went into the library and walked among the stacks. He parked beside a rusty bridge, the Gaylord singing, "Tell me you are mine," following him out the open window and checked the dark recesses beneath the trestle. But no matter where he looked, still nothing. Everywhere he went, Drake couldn't stop thinking about Clara. The more time he spent with her, the more certain he was that he wanted to grow old with her by his side. While her reluctance to take his money frustrated him, he understood it at the same time. Just like her, he was used to making his own decisions, unencumbered by the opinions of others. Still, there were times when taking someone else's help was necessary. For Clara, this was one of those times. Drake knew that other men would be jealous, angry about competing against a ghost, but not him. That Clara had been married to another man, that she had had a son with him, didn't matter. His pride wasn't threatened. Everyone had a past, some more cluttered than others. Just because Clara had loved once before didn't mean she couldn't love again. She just needed someone special, the right man. Drake was convinced that he was who she had been waiting for. All he wanted was a chance to build something with her, a love that could stand its own test of time. For that opportunity, he would fight through Eddie, through Amos's disapproval, through anything. By the time Drake returned to the tavern, the sun had sunk almost to the horizon. The shadows were long. Darkness would soon arrive. In the 3 hours since he had last been there, the bar had changed. There were a dozen cars and trucks parked out front. A sign advertising beer flickered in one dingy window. Music carried out the open door, drifting into the street. Inside was livelier too. People milled about after work. Most everyone was drinking. A couple kissed beside the jukebox, the man's hand roaming across his gal's rear end, oblivious, oblivious to or uncaring about the scene they were making. Over the din of voices and music came a hoot of triumph. In a small back room, two men were playing pool. One pumped his cue in the air, his, his laugh a sharp cackle, while the other reluctantly held out a couple of crumpled dollars. Leaning against the bar, customers held up empty glasses, placing orders just as fast as the bartender could fill them. A younger woman stood with him behind the bar, though she seemed unwilling to help. The same drunk who had been there during his first visit was still slumped in his chair, all, although this time he appeared to be awake. Drake walked the bar looking for Tommy, but he wasn't there. Tired, as well as a little thirsty, he decided to wait and see if Clara's son would show up. After all, he had already searched the whole town. As he neared the bar, a seat suddenly emptied, and Drake slid into it. Minutes passed before the bartender could work his way to him, but soon enough the man asked, "What can I get ya?" Drake ordered a beer. When the man returned with his drink, Drake plunked a few coins on the bar and asked, "Do you know Tommy Sinclair?" The bartender's eyes narrowed a bit. "Sure," he said. "Has he been around lately?" "Been a while. Couple of days, I reckon." Drake nodded. "Thanks, anyway." He took a draw from his beer and then turned around to face the door. From here, he could see the whole bar and out the window to the sidewalk. If Tommy came in or happened to walk by, Drake would certainly see him. He could afford to be patient. He didn't want to return to Clara empty-handed, but if he did, he'd know it wasn't for lack of trying. "You are in my seat," a deep voice grumbled. Drake turned to find a mountain of a man standing beside him. He was broad-shouldered, with muscles that strained against the fabric of his shirt. His expression was ugly, his frown so deep that Drake expected it would have taken him an hour to turn it into a smile. He wasn't the man who had left the seat. "Nobody laid claim to it before I sat down," he answered wearily. "Don't matter none. I done told you it's mine." There was a time, not all that long ago, when Drake would have taken the man's threatening words as a challenge. He would have told the brute to get lost and then, when things inevitably went downhill from there, bunched up his fist and tried to give as good as he got. But he was a different man now, and new life with Clara beckoned to him. So close, so close, he could almost reach out and touch it. A barroom brawl wasn't worth the hassle. It was easier to walk away. All right, Drake said as he started to get out of the chair. "Let me grab my bear and then you can." He's gonna grab his bear and then he's gonna let the man sit down. No brawl for Drake here, 'cause he's in love. He don't wanna have no brawl. Hmm. But before he could finish, the man punched him in the face. Gosh. Guys, we're going to leave the suspense here until tomorrow morning. We are leaving the suspense here. Tomorrow morning, when we come back, we will be reading chapter 20. We will come to chapter 20 and see what happened after that man punched Drake in the face. The audacity, that man doesn't know who he's messing with. He doesn't know that Drake will fight the breeze. To have punched Drake is in the face is asking for trouble. And I can sense that that trouble is going to come in chapter 20. Yes, and I can't wait. I'm not going to read either, you guys, I promise. We will all read it tomorrow morning and and we will all learn what happened at the same time. Guys, I hope you all enjoyed the reading as much as I enjoyed reading it for us. I am enjoying this book and I'm wondering if maybe I could at Red Cross I could find another Dorothy Garlock book. I love her style. I could incorporate some of her style in the remainder of my book. What you all think? Yeah, I don't know what I did with the pencil. Yeah, so I think I might read a couple more of her books because that's the first time I'm reading from her. But I want to thank you all so much for coming. Mika, thank you so much for sharing, Mika. Joseph, thank you so much for coming. The lovely cat is always in the house, threatening me with good feelings. Yeah, Empress, threatening me with bad feelings. Overton, the son of a king, is here. Also, Shani Barney is here. And Sister Winsome and everybody else who came into the chat, peep in and run out, listen in the background, but don't say a word. Whatever your contribution is to the chat, I sincerely, sincerely appreciate you. That's going to be it from me for tonight, my friends. I want to say thanks to everybody. The Uganda family, welcome. Thank you so much for coming. You come in on the tail end actually when we are just about to wrap this up, but I nonetheless thank you so much for coming. I sincerely, sincerely appreciate it. All right. That's going to be the end of the live for tonight, my friends. Once again, thank you all so much for coming until, oh, you're late. Just a little bit late, my love, because I'm just wrapping up the live. But we will read again tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, we will continue reading the book Twice in a Lifetime by Dorothy Garlock. We have just a few more pages to go, so we should be finished at least by the weekend, maybe, so that we can start another book. Reading is healthy, guys. That is why I read so much. Yes, reading is healthy. And that's the whole deal. That's the whole mantra of my channel now. Is we're gonna do anything that is healthy. We're gonna read, we're gonna chat, we're gonna cook healthy meals and talk about our health and different health conditions. And that's the deal. All right, guys. So that's going to be it for me for tonight, my friends. Until next time. This is Trev from Trevessence, where your journey matters. Talk to you all later, guys. Have yourselves a great night. See, it's already 10:30 something. And I will see you all later.